Stratton.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Concord Township Zoning Commission meeting for Tuesday, February 4th, 2020. Tonight we have a few things on the agenda, but probably the most time-consuming and the first item on the agenda is a work session to discuss housing review. And Heather gave us a handout tonight to kind of guide us through this. So do you want to lead us through it, Heather?
Yeah.
And give us an overview?
So I know the idea of independent living was presented to the township several months ago, and one of the recommendations from the county and also from our comprehensive plan update was to take a look at senior housing, which may or may not include independent type living. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to kind of discuss housing trends, changes in demographics, and look at all types of housing that changes in housing that we're seeing nationally in Northeast Ohio and in Concord Township, so we can see like what we have here and where there might be gaps in different types of housing. So, I'm just gonna dim the lights here a little bit. Click. So this evening I'm going to break it down a little bit and understanding some of the housing trends, changing demographics, look at existing housing that's meeting, look at existing housing to meet, does the existing housing meet the current demand, and looking at some of the trends in new construction and how new construction has changed, a couple case studies to meet this new demand that we're experiencing. I'm going to have to post it. Okay. So first thing I want to do is kind of go through some of the evolutions of different housing styles that we've seen here in like the Youngstown, Akron, Cleveland metropolitan areas. Between 1920s and 1930s, the home ownership rate was around 45%. Most of the homes were built on small lots. Oh, somehow I'm on the wrong slide. This is not going to work out with me over here. Yeah. Often located close to streets without any types of front porches. We saw a lot of carriage houses. A lot, as far as the inside of the homes, there were a lot of small closets built with built-in storage. Small kitchens. We had a lot larger families back then in the 1920s and 30s. Kids shared bedrooms. It was very common. We had a lot more dense neighborhoods. This was obviously before the auto became very common, so there was a lot more pedestrian type housing development. Oh, I can do that. Yeah. So then we're looking during 1940s, 1970s. Here we have the post-war boom. Rapid growth in the U.S. population. The home ownership rate really spiked, reaching 60%. Housing development started to shift out towards the suburbs, which was brought on by the existence of the automobile and now being more affordable for families. Then you start to see, like when they're advertising for homes, you saw a lot more ads emphasizing driveways and garages and those type of, characteristics for the homes. We saw an increase in modern conveniences like central air conditioning and heating. As far as housing styles, we started to see bungalows, single-story ranches, bi-levels, split levels. And often there was a lot of multi-generational housing. So you may have had grandma living, with mom and dad and maybe even the grandkids. In the 1960s was the first time that housing was really targeted towards retirees as well. Homeowners didn't really need that large home, and They also enjoyed living in a community geared towards meeting the needs of their age group. So you started to see some of those senior living type dwellings. Thanks. Then we're getting into the 1980s and the 1920s, or to the 2000s, excuse me. There was declining, stagnant growth really in Northeast Ohio. You start to see the population shift out to the suburbs and to the ex-urban areas. It's really when Concord really started to flourish during those time periods as well. You started to see in the 1990s bigger homes on larger lots, and even with bigger master suites within those homes. And oftentimes minimum zoning requirements really did force houses to be so large with the minimum floor area, and there was a lot of communities' codes actually prohibited apartments and things like that. So, and the new construction was really pricey, and it really did cater towards those people that are moving up. So median household listing prices in 2010 was actually 2 times more than homes that were built in the 1900s, 1910, and 1940. So the housing units are becoming more expensive during this time period. Okay, then we had the impact of the 2008 crash. This was known as the biggest disruption in the housing market since the Great Depression. Housing markets had larger spikes in foreclosures, higher jump in renter households during this time period. We saw some of the older millennials starting to buy homes at a slower rate than their counterparts from 10 years ago. We started to see women renting more than males. Wealthy households, they had the steepest decline in home ownership rates. They dropped down to 80%, but still higher than the median, which was around 59%. We also saw during this time period that the rental rates started to spike up, and while income was going down, and that's because there was more demand for rental housing than there was supply, so that naturally pushes up the prices of rental units. So that's kind of like the evolution of the housing and the trends, and that kind of leads me into where we're seeing changes in demographics. Taking a look at our households and families, compositions. There are fewer families with children. 20% of households are families with children nationally right now, and that used to be the dominant type of house. So, mom and dad, children, used to be the majority of household makeup. Where right now we're seeing also changes. Women are having fewer children. They're having children later in life. And so they're having smaller families, which would typically require a smaller number of bedrooms in their house. So some other demographic trends. As we know, everyone's talking about millennials and baby boomers, and those two groups really are the dominant sectors of our population. Millennials make up 79.8 million people in the USA's population. That's the largest generation of individuals, and those are folks that are between the ages of 18 and 35. In 2014, for the first time in more than 130 years, young adults were more likely to be living in their parents' home than in any other living arrangement, and a lot of that has to do with the college debt that they owe and the tight housing market. And so we're seeing those millennials graduating from college and then moving back with their parents, and sometimes they're going right from that situation to purchasing their first home, and they're skipping over the whole rental. And as far as the millennial population, it is projected to continue to increase. In 2017, millennials did account for 34% of home buyers. They're looking for newly constructed entry-level houses, yet they're finding that the houses are too expensive for them. So they're more than likely going to be purchasing an already built home as their first house rather than a new constructed home. But millennials do want to live in areas that are close to their work, They would be willing to bike and walk to work, but they also want to live in an area where there's nice schools and they can afford the homes as well. So, the other largest demographic are the baby boomers. They make up 74.1 million people in the U.S., which is the second biggest generation of individuals. Those are aged between 52 and 70. They're going to be the most influential generation when they're retiring over the next 15 years. As they're becoming empty nesters, some of them are relocating, and oftentimes they're looking for a new house with a first floor master. But they want to stay within their communities as well. They don't necessarily want to leave. The other trend we're experiencing nationally are an increase in multi-generational living. So the charts on the right here show on a national level, in 1950 you can see there 21% of households were multi-generational, and that continued to decline, and it's been on the uptick probably since the 1980s, 1990s, and as of 2016, 20% of households were multi-generational, and that's 1 in every 5 households has, at least 2 adults from 2 separate generations, or a grandparent with a grandchild under the age of 25. That's how the Census Bureau identifies a multi-generational house. And with that, nationally, we're seeing a lot of racial and ethnic diversity. We're becoming more diverse at the national level. Which might be why we're seeing a little bit more of the multi-generational housing, and because senior housing is expensive. So that might play into some of the reasons why grandparents or parents might be moving in with their adult children. I also wanted to focus on a little bit more specific to Lake County and Concord Township. I know everyone knows that we're aging, especially in Concord Township, our median age keeps going up. I came across a report that Lake County did for their senior services levy, but they had a lot of good information on here at the county level and broken down per municipality. Based on this report, we're showing that there was Lake County in 2010 had 22.9% of their total population was age 60 or older. Median income was around $22,000, which is an increase from 2000, and those are also, we're seeing an increase in those with higher education. So it went up from 71 to 82%, so a roughly 10.9% increase. So if you look at Concord Township in relationship to the county average, and this table actually shows all the communities in Lake County that have that are above the county average as far as their percentage of population ages 60 and over. So I highlighted in yellow here, you'll see the 2010 population of Concord was 18,201, and we have roughly 24.5% of our residents over 60 and over, which was above the county average of the 22%. And this is just a map that shows that spatial representation. So the darker green areas have higher concentrations of seniors 60 and over. The lighter areas have smaller concentrations of seniors 60 and over. Thank you. This also had projections as far as where they think population is going to head over the next 20 years or 10 years. They were projecting that for Concord Township specifically, that we're going to continue to increase our 60-plus population. Between 2010 and 2030, they're estimating that our population of 60 and over is going to increase by 75%, going all the way up to 3,361. So, and that's one of the second highest increase of the jurisdictions within Lake County, so followed by Monroe. And this is a map that shows that percentage change. The dark blue have percentage changes projected between 200 and 400% increase. The red, they're having a decline in their senior 60 and over population, and then the other colors are in between Okay, so specifically Concord Township. I went and I looked at the American Community Survey estimates as far as housing units and to find out like when our housing was really built. So this pie chart here, and there's actually a table on the right, and I apologize, it's cut off, but shows the percentage of household units that were built depending on what year. So the 2% at the top, only 2% of our housing units were built between 1939 and earlier. The largest percentage of our housing units, were built between 1980 and 1999. That was 39%. And even between 2000 and 2009, another 18% of our housing units were actually constructed then. So if you remember from the trends, we're looking at larger houses on larger lots, bigger families, which you can see as you're driving through our community. We have a lot of two-story homes. And the next one, okay. So this breaks it down and shows the trend as far as, are they one-unit detached homes or are they attached homes? So one-unit attached homes make up about 12%, but our biggest type of housing units are single-family detached homes. So in 2000, that was about 75.5% of our housing stock, that's continued to increase, and I'm estimating that right now in 2020 that our single-family one-unit detached homes make up almost 82% of all of our housing stock. I pulled all our zoning permits issued for the last 10 years. We have only issued permits for single-family detached homes and single-family cluster homes. There have been no duplex dwelling units that have been constructed in the last 10 years or any new multifamily. Those were all prior. But as you see, like, so the dwellings with 2 to 4 units make up roughly 1.7% of all of our housing, and in buildings with 5+ units are about 4%. Thank you. This graphic is supposed to represent the Concord Township housing stock by the number of bedrooms. So on the bottom, studio housing units make up less than 1% of all of our housing. One bedroom makes up 1% of all of our housing stock. 2 bedrooms units make up about 15%, and 4 bedrooms is our largest housing units with the largest percentage dedicated towards that. So almost 40% of all of our housing units have at least 4 bedrooms in Concord. And these are based on the American Community Survey estimates. But if we look at, our households, we do know that 25% of people living in Concord Township, the households are people living alone. So there does seem to be a little bit of a mismatch if you've got 25% of your households as one individual living in a household, yet 40% of your housing stock has at least 4 bedrooms in it. Maybe those houses are too large for them. Maybe. Okay. So diving a little bit deeper into who makes up our households, 39% of our households in Concord are couples, no kids. Either they're empty nesters, or they never had kids. 25% make up single people living alone. It's what we've coined as nuclear families. Those are the households that have 2 parents with children under the age of 18. Those make up roughly 22% of all of our households in Concord. And then we have about 9% of households where you have 2 adults that are unrelated, living together, or 5% of our households are single parent families. To continue on with some more statistics about Concord Township, the average household size has been continuing to decline. The estimate was 2.49 people per housing unit, which is down from 3.4, which, as I mentioned earlier in the demographic kind of trends, you're seeing that household family size has been declining, which is consistent with this. We have 29% of our households have children under the age of 18. 49% of our households have one or more people 60 years or older. And 24.6%, roughly 25% of our households, as I mentioned previously, are people living alone. And the estimated median age in 2018 has continued to go up as our senior population continues to go up. It's estimated to be 47.3 years, which was up from 41.4 from the 2000 census. Okay, so what kind of homes are people buying and selling? What are the trends? And I did a little bit of research on the National Association of Retailers website. They put out a report in April of last year. Their report found that 30% of millennials, or 30% of all home buyers in 2019 were millennials. So they were one of the largest segments of the population purchasing homes. Gen Xers, and I put a little table over on the side in case you're not familiar with all these different trends, but Gen Xers, those are folks that were born between 1965 and 79. They purchased the largest homes, averaging around 2,100 square feet. And what's interesting too is the 52% of Gen Xers bought some kind of multi-generational home. Either their adult children were moving back in with them, or they had never left. So those are the people that are buying the multi-generational type homes. Looking at what trends for 2020, single-family homes are still the most popular home being built. People want to move to the suburbs. Even though they're the affordability issue, they're still the most common home being built, followed by townhomes, condos, and other ones. But homes are getting a little bit smaller on average, and that's just builders responding to market demand. And as I mentioned about like the millennials, I had commented that they're more than likely to buy a home that already exists versus buying a brand new home, and a lot of that has to do with affordability. So first-time buyers are more than likely are going to buy a home that's already within the community versus somebody who might be downsizing, who has more wealth, who would buy that new downsize home, new construction. Despite what seems to look like demand for smaller units, large homes are still being built. This shows from, it's a little blurry, 1999 to 2019, the average home the average living area square footage has increased, both median and average. It did start to go down, cyclical with the recession, but it's starting to go. It may start to go back up. So like the median floor area actually increased, while the average, due to outliers, did kind of, well, actually the median due to outliers did show an increase, but if you look at the average, the square footage is going down slightly, but they're still much higher than they were in 1999. So there may be this need for a wider range of housing options. There's a tight market supply. New housing is not very affordable for first-time home buyers. A lot of times that has to do with the community's zoning restrictions that require certain lot sizes or minimum square footages, as we know. There may be a gap of this middle housing. There may be a need for more duplexes or triplexes, townhouses, live-work type units. Go ahead, thank you. So I had a couple examples of what some communities are trying to do with their existing housing stock to try to accommodate the trends and demographics that we're seeing over the years. And this idea of accessory dwelling units. So an accessory dwelling unit would be like a separate living unit that you could add onto your property that would be an accessory to your primary dwelling. It could look at a lot of different ways. It could be a conversion of a garage into a living unit. It could be an addition onto your home that would create an additional living unit. It could be a detached living unit in your yard. But it would be definitely on the same parcel of land, and it would be an accessory to the primary use of the property. Sometimes these are referred to granny flats or in-law suites, backyard apartments. So who would maybe stay in these type of units? Millennials might. They've got a lot of student debt. They want to live close to work, but they can't afford their first house quite yet. Boomers might move into these accessory units. They may want to stay in their community and might be on a fixed income, but maybe they can't afford where they're staying now, and maybe they'll move in with their kids. But it enables maybe elderly parents too to stay close to their families and still have privacy and maintain their independence. So looking at some of the typical regulations on how other communities have regulated accessory dwelling units, some of them require that the primary homeowner live in one of the units. They restrict minimum and maximum sizes of the units, both for the primary unit and the accessory unit. They may limit the number of bedrooms in the accessory dwelling unit. They may prohibit separate entrances to the accessory dwelling unit. That way you have to come in the same door. They may only be allowed on lots that meet minimum sizes and may be restricted to various zoning districts within a community as well. And lastly, they would remain as an accessory use to the main dwelling, and they wouldn't be able to be sold separately from the main dwelling. That I haven't seen anything in Lake County, anyone doing any of that here. They've been doing that all over in other parts of the United States, but specifically in Lake County, I haven't seen anyone address accessory dwelling units. So, all right, so some other case studies, examples of maybe how other communities, and even here in Concord, may be addressing the changes in housing and due to the changing demographics of our population. There's some communities that are doing some really neat infill type developments in more developed areas. Some mixed use developments that may incorporate commercial, office, residential uses within the same area. And then there's a lot of new senior housing actually being built to accommodate that. This is an example in Lakewood, the McKinley Place. There was an old elementary school that was demolished, and they came in and built 40 new townhouse units within this, giving opportunities for empty nesters and millennials to move into newer, nice housing in Lakewood. And it was a good example of an infill project that helped provide new housing in a community where they might not have green field and green space to develop on a greenfield site. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Hudson and their First in Main and their downtown. This I pulled off their website. They are getting into their phase 2 of their downtown plan, and they've also seen, unlike Concord, they've seen a decrease in their population, but they've also experienced decrease in household size. They're having an increase in median age. They've developed several hundred acres of land for new housing over the years, and they thought that allowing for a brownfield infill development to help provide new housing opportunities within their downtown would help meet the need of some of the millennials and the aging baby boomers within their community. And so that's another example of somewhere where we're seeing some of this happening. And as you know, the JED in the township a couple years ago worked with a firm to help create a vision for a town center, a new town center, potentially in Concord, over by the new roundabout at Auburn and Capitol Parkway. This is a rendering from that town center master plan. One of the goals of that plan was to provide a different type of housing that may attract millennials and give boomers a different option if they're looking to stay within the community but can't either afford or maintain the housing that they're in right now. So this is just a rendering of that. It's a mixed-use type development, walkable, pedestrian-friendly, commercial, residential, office, a mix of uses. We do have some of the zoning in place for that to happen. There hasn't been any interest yet, though. Next slide, please. And this was just another site plan from the plan that kind of showed how potentially it might be laid out with the different retail office spaces, with the residential kind of tucked behind, and more of the office and retail and commercial on the main corridors. Go ahead. Thanks. In our neighboring community here in Geauga County in Munson Township, they built a senior living facility, and this really is like a true continuum of care campus. It's right outside of like the Notre Dame Cathedral School. I think it was mentioned by Bill Brooks that was at one of our meetings a couple months ago. But this development includes a variety of different type of housing. Cottage homes, and you can go to independent living, all the way up to the memory care assisted living. It's the full spectrum of different age-related type housing. So that was recently built within the last couple of years. One more, thanks. Well, and then even here in Concord, we got the Vista Springs Assisted Living Facility that was built in 2016 on Auburn Road. These are assisted living, so they don't need skilled care like the skilled nursing facility, but it is a residential type use. There's 94 units in there, studio rooms to 2-bedroom units. So that also is relatively new. And this is one of the newer developments. It's another phase of the Quail Hollow subdivision, but it was just recently developed, the Hydro Villas by Ralph Victor Construction. He's got 51 units approved to be built over there. He's showing 1- and 2-story type housing units ranging from 1,686 square feet to 2,665 square feet. I looked at some of the plans on the website. They all have, master bedrooms on the first floor with options for basements. These are freestanding condominiums, so the condominium association is going to take care of all the yard work and all the maintenance outside, and as the homeowner, you're just worried about the inside. So it is kind of maintenance-free living. And talking with the builder too, of like the 14 homes that he sold already, some of them are under construction, only one has actual kids. So it's almost naturally becoming its own type of senior neighborhood. It's the boomers that are purchasing these. They're downsizing. They want to stay in the community, or they're coming from from nearby communities, and they've got the money in order to purchase the nice home that they want and get all the upgrades that they want. Let's see. So, just kind of to sum it up, like, now what? And I know you're probably gonna have lots of questions, but do we already have regulations in place that might allow for new housing, or if we renovate existing housing, to meet the needs that we might have with our changing household types in the community? Do we need something new? Can the Capital District with the Innovative Site Plan Unit Development fulfill some of that? Or could the R3 be used as a tool for senior living or independent living? Or what about the R2 plan unit development? Without specific, do we have to make changes to those districts? Is there potential for those districts that are already in place to help meet those needs? And if so, do we need to change anything? Where might we want to see some of these type of new housing being developed in the township. I know that was, you know, if we were going to zone specifically for independent living, that was one of the biggest questions, like, where would it go? You know, where would it be appropriate? And what about accessory dwelling units? Is that something that we want to talk about, or in-law type suites, or, so I'm kind of like leaving it up up in the air as to what you guys want to talk about, or what you want to task me with looking at a little bit more, or to your questions, or anything I've talked about, or any ideas, so.
I have a I have a comment. You know, we have conservation development in the township, which gives the boards like us a lot of flexibility to see what's appropriate for the areas. And since our township is like it is, with hills and rolling hills and valleys and stuff, that would be something maybe we could incorporate somehow in that, where we can allow to work with developers to be flexible, have a better understanding what fits into a desired area. And this way here we can control the design and the size, what's going to hit the generations. Right now, we're talking about the biggest population as we keep going. In the future is going to be the elderly. They want to stay in the township, but yet they want to have things that are somewhat close that they can maybe walk to, and close shopping, so they don't have to drive extensively, especially when they get up in years. You know, a lot of them can't drive too much anymore. And I know we have Lake Tran and stuff that helps, but if we allow them the flexibility what conservation development gives us, maybe we can work more closely with the developers to tailor areas within the township.
I would tail in on that because I've kind of lived this. I moved to Concord in the 70s, had 2 little kids, built a 2-story, 4-bedroom house, and then in the 80s moved in another place in Concord, built a bigger 2-story, 4-bedroom house. I don't need that anymore, so for the last couple of years, Hiram and I were just talking, we're in the same boat. I started looking around. I want to stay in Concord. If I live in Lake County, I want to live in Concord. And it's really, really hard to find things that fit when you get to be the point where I want a 3-car garage, as you know.
And a ranch.
But in a ranch, 1 floor, or at least a master bedroom on the main floor. And they're just not out there. It's extremely limited. I've watched Zillow and Realtor.com for 3 years. It's really hard to find in Concord. We've got a lot of big houses, nice houses that I don't want anything to do with because they're too large. I think we need something new. Since I've been on this board, we had some opportunities that, in all cases, we got a lot of community resistance on. We had some apartments that were going to go in on 608, really high-end apartments with 2-car garages, really, really nice places. People didn't want that. We had the town center with nice condos and apartments. People didn't want that. Just last month, we had the horse farm on Prouty Road, where we were going to have cluster homes in there, which I think could have been nice. People didn't want that. So how do we change the attitude of our residents who don't want that kind of housing, and yet at some point they're going to be looking for that kind of housing? And what could we do with our zoning that would, as Frank said, make it more adaptable to the kind of housing you're talking about here, and the kind of things that people need as they get older and want to stay in the community. So I'm all for looking at our zoning requirements and doing something innovative to come up with some sort of alternative housing that would satisfy those that want to stay in Concord.
I think we should look real hard at existing zoning designations and find something that would fit that scenario, that gives us an option to have a little more input on what is built without giving up the ability from a township standpoint of having that input if that property is rezoned. A perfect example is a horse farm property, okay?
Yeah.
It was up for an R3. There's a lot of bad things in R3 that people were opposed to, okay? And even if the intent of the initial petitioner is for something that's not going to be the maximum density or the maximum, issues of an R3, which to some people are unsavory, you run the risk of once it's rezoned to R3, you have no control anymore at that point. So if that person that has the property sells it to somebody else, it's been rezoned to R3, they could come in and completely do something different, and as long as it's within the R3 requirements, you're stuck with it.
Right.
Or you could rezone it, and somebody could come in with the best of intentions, and we could rezone it because we like what they're talking about, and they change their mind. The conditions of the market change. Something occurs that they decide that maybe they don't want to pursue that, that aspect any longer, and they make the changes, and consequently, again, we have zero power, to affect any changes once that zoning designation has been granted. So I'm thinking that we should probably take a harder look at maybe like the R3 district, I think is a good example. Maybe take a harder look at that, narrow down some of the options that can be done, maybe tighten down some of the density options, maybe tweak some of the requirements in R3 that would give it more of a flavor, where if we do make that zoning change, that we're not as at risk for that changing dramatically from what the original intent was to what the ultimate product could be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was one of the big issues I know that was the thing that really bothered me about the horse farm designation and zoning to R3 was, yep, I like what the guy had to say. I think it was a great idea. I thought there was a lot of opportunity I think it was a good plan for the township, but there was that option that if something would happen, we don't have any guarantee, we could be potentially saddled with something we don't want, and we would have very little power to do anything about it once that die is cast, where you're pretty much stuck. So I think if we would have maybe a zoning designation, like I said, I think R3 would probably be a good one to look at, for that kind of a model, to tweak the regulations, look at the setbacks, look at the buffers, look at some of the things that go with that, so that, because that's a lot of the problem. I think a lot of the residents that are opposed, there's no doubt that there's a lot of opposition to anything that even talks about higher density than, a unit per half acre. Even that gets a lot of pushback. So I think if we come up with something that has better buffers, or there's some other requirements on the property to get it zoned to that's going to be more palatable to the people that are surrounding the area, then I think we'll have less opposition, than what would happen if there's just a lot of open-ended issues like we have with R3.
Right, and I think that's maybe some of the reason why you were, Frank, referring to like the residential conservation development, because with that rezone, you're approving a preliminary plan as well, so you know what to expect. So maybe there's a way to accommodate.
Yeah, we could put.
Maybe there's some changes in the RCD that need to be made. There was some recommendations in the 2015 comp plan update that talked about, looking at the RCD and, reviewing that.
I think any kind of any type of a review, a plan, any sort of a plan review, as a stipulation to that rezoning request, I think would be, and it would have to be something that would be enforceable.
Right.
Because
it would have
if
to
we
be a
make
plan
that
development.
change, that development is what's going to happen. We don't have to look back and say, oh no.
Right, and then if there are changes, you have a process in place for them that requires them to come back.
Could we put it in as a contingency saying, yes, it can be R3 if this development goes through? Because I agree with Andy, if we approve something as an R3 with something in mind, that developer goes bankrupt or anything changes their mind, they sell it, we've already authorized it to go to R3. Now it could be anything.
Right.
But if we could make a contingency that said, yeah, it could be R3 as long as you build what you've shown us.
Right.
And if you change that, then it reverts back to what it was before. I don't know if that's legal.
I don't know if that's legal or not,
I don't
being
either,
a township,
but
but we can look into that.
What the R3 is now?
What's that?
Can't we take a look at the R3
Yeah.
now?
Okay.
Yeah.
We
areas?
could. There's a couple other good
Instead of
examples, I think, that,
rezone.
that you didn't cite, Heather. Auburn Hills condos.
Yeah.
I think it's an excellent example. It's spacious, they're condos, but it's really pretty. It's lower density, there's only like 38 units up on those hills, and they're beautiful. Or even Aria's Way on the end of Prouty Road turned out, considering it started out as a condo complex that went bankrupt and then went into the cluster homes, it actually turned out pretty okay.
And Aria's Way is, the front half is R1,
Uh-huh.
and the back half is the R3, so
Right.
they've got
So you gotta mix
two different
the
things kind of
condos
going
in
on
there.
there. And the Auburn Hills development, that's zoned R1, and in
Yeah.
that case, the engineer and the developer got creative with our R1 zoning requirements that allow you to put more than one dwelling on a lot if you can show that you could subdivide them into
And it turned out quite
separate
well,
lots.
so.
Is there anything legally, I'll probably have to check with, our attorneys,
Mhm.
that we could stipulate if a developer does go bankrupt, for example, that everything comes to a halt and diverts back to our reconsideration for what the next owner would maybe decide to do, where we would have authority rather than being stuck by a law?
Well, I think we'd have to somehow figure out, first of all, if we could approve a plan as, in conjunction with the rezone. And then, if you can do that, then they're held by the plan, but I don't know that we can just approve a district change, and then if something doesn't happen, it reverts back. I don't see that that's permitted at all per the Ohio Revised Code, that there's just no process in place for that.
But if we locked it to a particular development and then it fell through,
The township could initiate a rezone to
Right.
rezone it back.
right?
Right.
Some way of being
Right,
able to
so the
control
zoning
it.
commission could, or the trustees could initiate a zoning amendment
Exactly.
to change it to something else.
Right.
Yeah, mm-hmm,
Yeah, it all falls under that, do we need something new? And I think the answer is yes.
Well, didn't we have, a senior living zoning and then we
This stuff.
got rid of it?
yeah, there was,
Was it R?
it was an
R5?
R5,
Yeah.
R8, R5?
R5.
Yeah.
I'd like to see what that was,
Okay,
yeah.
I can email it. I
Because
can
we
send
didn't,
that to you.
we didn't eliminate that from the zoning text that long ago.
Right,
That
we reviewed
Couple
that.
years, right?
Right, so
Couple
in,
years ago?
Yeah.
right after we adopted, the township adopted the comp plan update
Right.
at the end of 14, beginning of 15.
Right.
We did some text amendments. One of them was consolidating the residential districts, and we also looked at the R5. And we started to dive into looking at senior housing. If you remember, I did a bunch of research on like Del Webb and some of the other age-restricted communities that were happening in the area. And one of the recommendations of the comp plan update was to reevaluate that R5 district. It had been on the books for several years, yet no one had ever initiated it. There was a very specific mix of different type of housing that was required to be all within that development. Some of it had to be geared towards the skilled nursing, portion had to be for the assisted living, and I think there was independent living, I don't remember exactly. But there was a very unique mix of uses that all had to fall into place with large setbacks, and I think it was a minimum of 50 acres. And I think at the time, the township had determined that it wasn't likely going to happen ever, so we took it out of the books. And since
But
then,
wasn't that in response to the Slovene?
I think it
home?
was.
I think it was,
Yes.
I think it was in
Yeah.
response
Right.
to the Slovene home.
Yes.
Mhm.
When we did that, when we put together that because of the size of the project
Right.
and the number of acres that were involved, and I think that all fell into the Slovene home,
Yes.
Mhm.
which is now the,
Environmental Learning
the
Center.
nature center over there.
Yeah.
So I think that, I would like to see either we take a revisit R5 and look at maybe potentially bringing it back, or looking at, just looking at the regulations and maybe using some of the, I just have this feeling, and no matter what we come up with, okay, there's a hypersensitivity to density in this township, there just is.
Yeah,
Okay, anything that is more than what the minimum, an R1 density situation gets a lot of pushback.
right.
Always has.
Mhm.
And I think that's, we could come up with some really cool stuff and some really nice ideas. And I think that at the end of the day, if we have something that's going to have some sort of a density issue, that's going to allow for a density bonus, or more than one dwelling per half acre, or third acre, or whatever, it's just going to be an uphill. It's going to be uphill sledding. You know, I mean, from an adoption from the township, from the residents, because that just always seems to be a real bugaboo with reference to anything that we do, whether it's whether it's condos, whether it's apartments, whether it's cluster homes. I mean, they're all great ideas, and there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think there's with the demographics show that the report, by the way, that you did a fantastic job on. I mean, putting all the numbers together puts a real idea behind everything. But when you look at those numbers, I mean, we're trending in that direction as a community. You know, we're aging. You know, people want to downsize. I think there's a demand for these types of housing options, but every time somebody brings one to the table, it always gets, the room is packed, and there's a lot of people that are very opposed to anything that it's too dense. You know, the density's bad, and as a township, we're running out. We don't have a lot of large acre development opportunities out there where we can say the project's got to be a minimum of 100 acres or 75 acres. I mean, there's just not a lot of that out there that still is available for development like that. I mean, really the town center project, I think, is probably the next best opportunity we have, to put something together with mixed use, with a lot of housing options and density issues that'll all be concentrated in one area. And I think, and for the most part, I think that it's a fairly well-received idea for that area. But I mean, if you start plunking, properties outside of that are either abutting R4, R1 residential areas, it's going to be, pitchforks and torches.
Mhm.
And we've all been through that enough times, so we know what happens. But I think if there's a way that we could take the existing districts and tweak them to the point where there would be a certain level of comfort with the surrounding residents, like the bigger buffers, or some really high demands on screening and buffering and vegetation, things like that, trees, whatever, to kind of help that. I think that people would probably be a little more receptive to it than just plunking down 80 units on a 25-acre lot right off the 44. So that's my thought. But I think we have enough. I think there's no need to reinvent the wheel here.
Right.
I think we've got enough text, and we've spent a lot of time over the last several years on buffers and screenings and right-of-ways and all that stuff, that setbacks and everything. That I think we've done a lot of good work in those areas. I think that we've got the foundation. We just have to come up with something that would give somebody an option, just like the conservation development is an option.
Mm-hmm.
We could have some sort of a senior living or some sort of a higher density option that could be used as an option to an R1 or an R4 or something like that. I don't know. That's my thought.
Does Vista Springs have room to grow? Do they have any intention to grow into like the memory care?
They have 70 units that are assisted living and 24 units that are dedicated to memory care. So I don't see them growing. Based on testimony from Bill Brooks, who helped develop the Vista Springs, who was on the Ralph Victor construction project at the very beginning, he had talked about his idea of the whole continuum of care. First the skilled nursing, or first you start at the independent living, you move into assisted living, and then to the skilled nursing facility. And his master plan in his mind was in the medical corridor over on Auburn Road. You have Lake Health. They have a great relationship with the skilled nursing facility in Lake Health. So I don't think the assisted living is looking at expanding or adding any other kind of use, but kind of what Andy was saying, if you go back and look at the R5, and what I had said about it was that full breadth of all those different type of uses. maybe there's, you know, I don't know that we need another assisted living or another skilled nursing facility, but maybe we do need those, you know, more of an independent living, and could we work within some existing text or allow and somehow limit it to a certain area and maybe only allow one within a certain proximity, so we're not getting a saturation of too much or in the wrong place. And I don't know where the right place is. Is it maybe over there off of Auburn Road? You know,
It would stand to reason it makes a lot of sense to have it there because of the facilities that are there already with the hospital and everything.
mm-hmm,
And if it's needed, it can be done. My parents, for years, lived in Ashland, a development that had assisted living, which they eventually moved into. Well, reluctantly, we had to move them in there, but anyhow, once they got into it, they loved it because everything was there. But then as they aged and they needed more care, there was another part of that development that they could move into,
yeah,
still there, but then make them feel like they were moving, you know, into a captive area. In other words, like my dad used to say, I don't want to move in with those sick people. Well, they're not sick, they just need more care.
right,
And then eventually, my parents went to the third phase when they had to go in because of Alzheimer's into a skilled nursing facility where they finally lived their remaining years. But it was all encompassed together, so it didn't make them feel like they were being, you know, shifted from point to point, but that's emotionally,
mm-hmm,
that would make them feel comfortable,
right.
so.
Heather, I'd suggest if we review R3 and revisit R5, those would be two good things to do to look for opportunity in
Okay.
the next meeting.
And
Probably our
then
best opportunity. 3
maybe,
and 5.
what about like locations of potential R3? I mean, we have like the purpose statements in
Yeah.
the zoning resolution that talk about locational requirements. Are
Mm-hmm.
those still adequate? Is that still the same thought process? You know, would there be changes that maybe we would want to contemplate based on, you know, just, you know, decisions of trying to create, you know, housing?
If we're gonna put a minimum acreage for the development on that, I'd like to see where it could possibly, I would like to see what's available, what the inventory for the
Oh,
township looks
Sure.
like.
Look
Oh,
at the
yeah,
map.
yeah.
You know, so we could see where, I mean, you
Mhm.
know, there might be some places where, with the proper adjustments, it would be feasible, where if we don't have those adjustments, then it wouldn't be.
Right, and then we
So-
could rule out specific locations
Right,
and say,
that's what
no,
I'm
that
saying,
wouldn't
and
work
look,
there due to,
I'd be interested to see where
Yeah.
it could go.
okay, because there is a
because
minimum
you
10-acre
know-
requirement
You
right
know,
now.
if
Yeah.
there's something where it can go, somebody's gonna wanna try to figure it in there, so.
Right,
I mean, maybe it'd be a good idea to have an idea, you know, have a general understanding of what the inventory looks like and where those types of developments could potentially
Mhm.
come up as an option, and then decide, you know, if we wanna put some restrictions on where
mhm,
it could go versus, or maybe acreage size, so it did, if you put so many acres to it, you know, then that's gonna obviously limit, you know, what kind of options would be available right there just by doing that.
right. And then one of the main goals too would be to try to figure out a way that we could approve a plan as part of the rezone too, so.
Right, yeah, there'd
whether
have
it's
to be some
maybe-
sort of a
maybe it's an
preliminary
overlay
plan
district or,
review, or
yeah.
site plan
Yeah.
review, or,
Yeah, so
know,
there's
some
more
process.
control from the township,
right,
yeah,
to what we, I mean, as to what we're able to. You know,
Yeah.
There's certain things we
Sure.
can't control, but
yeah.
as long as it's within our purview, I think, you know, we should try to build that in, so.
Do we not have any language in our code about the accessory dwelling units?
We don't, no, I mean,
I mean,
we don't,
because you made
And
a
that's-
good point when you were saying like, oh, if you build that accessory unit, look, it's on the same parcel, could you sell it separately? I mean, if they split the parcel.
some
would
communities
have to be
stipulate
zoned.
you can't. It is purely an accessory to the primary dwelling, which means you can't split it off and sell it off separately. No, we've, as far as I know, the township's never looked at accessory dwelling units. It's a relatively newer planning type concept. I mean, I think you've heard of in-law suites. We do get a lot.
Granny units,
What's that?
granny units.
Granny units and
I've never heard it called that.
And I don't know how that would work specifically in Lake County, or if that's something that would be, the township would be amenable to or not. We do have a lot of, I just got a call today from somebody wanting to know if they could build a second house on their lot. And they had a half acre on Johnny Cake, which our code does not allow that, by the way. But there are a lot of calls of people buying homes and they want to know, can they build their mom and in-law suite?
That to me is a slippery slope.
It kind of is.
That's a
yeah.
tough one, because
It
now
is.
you're affecting next door neighbors. So even if you started to, even if a half acre lot that it would allow for some sort of an accessory building like that, you're talking about having a major impact on people on both sides of that, and potentially in the back. That's more of an issue. I don't know that I'd want to go down that path.
I don't know that we would either, but there's ways to limit those potential impacts. I mean, like I had mentioned, you can not allow them to have their own separate entrance. You
Right.
can limit the number of bedrooms. I don't know if a township could do this or not, but you could maybe stipulate that you can't rent it. It has to be, occupied by a family member, but then I don't know how you police that,
That's what I'm
you know?
There's a lot of
Right.
enforcement. I see
But we
a
do
lot of-
allow
a lot of
duplexes
attempt
by
ones,
right. But we do allow duplexes by right in our R1 and R4 districts, which a dwelling with an attached accessory dwelling unit is a duplex, really. The only difference is it wouldn't necessarily meet the minimum living area that our code currently requires, and the enclosed parking space requirement. So and you would have to have a slightly larger lot, but, we can hold off on reviewing accessory dwelling units and start focusing on, as you guys had mentioned, let's re-resurrect the R5, see if there's anything out of there that we might want to pull back into, or amend, look at the R3, and how we might be able to have a little bit more control when approving.
Yeah, I think we work with legal and come up with, some requirements that we could place that isn't going to create a lot of legal challenges, without getting too far off into the weeds on it. If we're reasonable, I think it would be a good way to approach as a secondary, option, just like conservation zone.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna do this, and it's gonna be very tightly controlled. That type of thing.
Okay.
But I still think, regardless, density is always going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Always.
And since we have R5, we did many years ago put it there for a reason. Now that we see what the trends are happening now, we could tweak it a little bit better.
Possibly,
Rather than recreate the whole wheel again,
yeah.
you know?
I don't, I'm willing, I'll take a look, pull that back out and look at it. I don't know that
Yeah.
I would think that we need a whole new district to allow that. I mean, we have
Right.
a couple of those components already within our community. I don't know that
Sure.
we need more of those,
Sure.
but, even under the R3 right now, we have those maximum densities. We've had developers up here stating that, well, I'm not gonna even go for the maximum density. So maybe there's some other avenue for them to get the number of units they want, but in a district that has a lower potential maximum density. And I don't know what that is, and because even last night at the trustee public hearing on the rezone for Ralph Victor Construction, which, by the way, the trustees did approve your recommendation to deny his rezone application, so that did not go through. But he stated that he was only looking at about 2.5 units, even though under the district he could go up to 6. So, I don't know. There's a lot of things to consider.
We have to create it to where he doesn't have that, there's no option.
Yeah.
Or there's a way to
Take away
approve his
that
plan
option.
and hold him to the plan.
Right. Yeah.
If there's a way to,
Right.
okay, if you say you're gonna do this, then that's what you're gonna do, okay.
Very good. Good food for thought.
Yeah, good stuff, Heather.
Okay.
Thanks for
Item number 2 on our agenda, you have before you the minutes of the January 7th, 2020 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as written?
Mr. Chairman, I so move that we accept the minutes as written for January 7th.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Hiram, thank you. All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. Item 3, correspondence report by zoning commission members. I'll start with Hiram. Anything?
I'm not a member.
But did you have
I'm
any?
an alternate member.
You're st- Did you have anything?
No, sir.
Okay, so,
Nothing.
Andy?
Nope.
Nothing. And I had nothing either. Item 4, audience participation. Anybody out here that would like to speak? Vanessa, please give us your name and address and
Vanessa Pesic, 11705 Kelly Court, and thank you, Heather, for that great presentation. It had lots and lots of really interesting facts. Figures I need to mull them over a lot because there really was a lot there to talk about. One question that I had was under single-family homes, we have an increase over the decades in single-family homes. And then there was a mention that is either a homeowner or a condo, single detached. And so I was wondering if we could have a breakdown and an understanding and definition of what that whole category is and the breakdown of that. I'm not sure if, like in Quail Hollow, that the single-family detached condos, how many of that type of housing unit is in Concord versus single-family home owner, owner, as we're used to in a traditional sense. It'd be interesting to see how many of that type has been utilized and built over the years, because that's something that it sounds like when you're talking about, downsizing is something you want, except for your third garage. So what you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to build a second two-story garage with one of those like toaster things.
They do that in Quail
Japan,
Hollow.
they do that, yeah. So
They do.
you're just gonna have
I
to
have a
get
friend
your
that
very
has
own little lift in order to do that, and then you will have your three-car garage in a smaller footprint.
But you bring up a good point. There are a lot of those in Quail Hollow, and they're very nice. They're really nice, those single detached condos. A lot of them.
Right, and there, and I don't know where else it is, but that is a housing stock that is great for people who want to downsize,
That's
just
what-
lock it up and go down somewhere warm for the winter, except
Yep.
this winter.
High Grove Village is that. It's a single-family condo.
Right, so, then I was really interested to see that the percentage of multi-generational homes was 52%, which was really interesting. If you have a senior independent living facility, many times they say 55 and older as a requirement. So I'm not sure how that fits into the greater scheme of things. Do you restrict it to just senior or something like that? Or as we saw, multi-generation is increasing, maybe the idea is not to limit it to a certain age group. So those are just a few of the statistics that quickly jumped out at me, but I'm sure there's a lot more that are really interesting that as we go through this more, we can think about also. And then also, there's a lot of discussion about what the community would like and not like, and pitchforks and torches, I heard several times.
I said that.
No, just once.
Yeah, one time.
And so, I guess that it's really useful to listen to all sides of the community and not demonize anyone, especially when people come up here, because for a lot of people, it's intimidating and a scary thing to come up and talk to everyone and be on TV and all the rest. And I think it's really good to encourage people to come up and express their ideas. And also, I think that it would be really good for the township to understand, in a large sense, what does the community want? Because while you heard something from Heather's presentation, somebody else could have heard something else from Heather's presentation and come away with something different. And so finding ways to really assess where the community is and what the community wants. Because Rich brings his perspective, I bring a certain perspective, you know, somebody who's 32 brings a different perspective. And so really understanding in a broader sense what the whole community would like and finding some way to query the township in a representative, fair way might be useful, because if you're just talking, and I get up here a lot and we talk to our 10 best friends, that's not really going to help, you know, with the whole community. So looking and thinking about ways to do that might be another useful thing to think about. And with that, oh, R3 and or a PUD or an overlay, because what you keep talking about really is a PUD. Currently, what is it, 100 acres or some such thing, unless it's an innovative site, innovative district. But the PUD is, you know, what you're really saying, right? Which is, we want to look at that specific plan, and we want to approve that plan, and if you want to make changes to the plan, then you're going to have to come before us and show me the changes before we approve the changes. So it's really something like a PUD.
On a smaller scale.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So something like that might be the way to go. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Anybody else from the public? Okay. Well, with that, we conclude tonight's agenda. The next meeting of the Zoning Commission is March 3rd, 2020, and if there's no further discussion,
Nothing
anybody?
here? No.
Okay. We'll adjourn.